We are going to talk on the subject of how to find money. I will first turn to Julia, who said she will want to get some macro data in. But to warm you up, I would say to our audience that it might seem like awful lot of money, 600 billion, 700 billion, which we are talking about. But let's take a comparison. 2023 EU budget, which is only about 1% of the EU GDP, was 186.6 billion. So technically, if we could forego EU investment into EU countries, bar, of course, the sacred agricultural support for a few years, we could actually contribute substantially to recovering Ukraine. But Julia, the floor is yours now.
Thank you. First of all, good morning. And I would speak about very practical things, because I think that it is going to be many thoughts on the future economic development, on green transition, on being greener, cleaner, and build better. But I think that I need a little bit to highlight the figures that is going to be the prerequisites for recovery and reconstruction. So I think that the vision of economic development should be based on sound foundation. And therefore, the bright future of Ukraine is based on what we, like a government, and what our partners are doing right now. So I might say that despite of the loss of GDP last year, around 30%, we still managed to save the macroeconomic stability. And I think it's a very good sign, and it's really the basic for the reconstruction and recovery. And I would like to highlight several figures. So according to the National Bank of Ukraine report, in 2023, consumer inflation will be down to 10.6%. The core inflation is going to be around 9%. I think that it actually is going to be less, 8.6 and 8.7%. And the inflation will slow down in the forthcoming years. All institutions in our country and abroad are reviewing the economic forecast. So we, like a Minister of Economy, so we predict that this year we will return to growth up to 4%, and BU usually more skeptical, or let's say realistic. So they say the growth will be, but it's around 3%. And of course, we have very high unemployment rate, but it's obvious. We have 5 million Ukrainians living abroad, and something that we're facing right now on the labor market, it calls structural unemployment, when the employees lack of the skills that demand from the employer side. So that's why we, like a government, right now focus during this year and next years on the training of the staff, because it's a crucial. It's impossible to start the reconstruction and recovery without skilled Ukrainian that live in country. So finally, recently the NBU decreased the interest rate up to 22%. As a participant of this discussion, I would say that I have advocated for veggie decree. I think that our macroeconomic situation, it allows us for more flexibility. But as usual, NBU is more realistic, let's say like this. So in our core industry, we see improvements. The focus for the harvest of oils and grain will be bigger than last year, at around 50 million tons. So, and I would say, of course, we have problems with export, but I think that we would improve it by the alternative transport route. And I hope that also, like a government, we will be able to provide insurance. I think before the November, so we would try, November is a season of big exports, so we would be able to provide insurance from the Ukrainian government and both from EBRD side. So it's something that can make the risky of the business operation in Ukraine. It's very important and vital during the wartime. So I think that next 4 years we see as a bridging towards future growing and fast-growing future-oriented economy. Now we're working like a government on Ukraine facility plan. It's something that was offered by the EU side to show the perspective of 4-year economic development of our country, to highlight the main sectors that would be the locomotive for economic development. And we see green steel, we see agri-processing, we see logistic projects, digital projects, military tech projects in this economic development plan. So it means that we believe that the efforts that is done by Ukrainian government and by our international partners will encourage business to implement more ambitious projects in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I think this is very uplifting to hear this country not pleading, but explaining how its economy is holding up, picking up, and this is great foundation, of course, for the recovery effort. I would ask Rostyslav, maybe you could explain a little bit how you foresee, because of course, first there will be the donor support, then there will be the multilateral part, and then finally Ukraine, of course, will return to free markets with direct investment from foreign investors to grow among European Union nation states. This is the end state. Here we can describe it. It's far more difficult to describe the end state of European security situation, which of course also has to be sorted, but luckily we can this morning ignore it. It's maybe irrational, but please, can you explain the economic end state and how we reach there?
Yeah. Good morning to everybody. So, in fact, the only source of funding, of the big funding to get the full-scale recovery of 500, 600, 700 billion, which we now know these numbers, is the private markets. There is no other chance to get this amount of money other than at the private markets. Because if you look at the budget constraints and the budget priorities for all our partners, we will be happy if you will find 20% of that amount within the next 5, 10, 20 years. Because, and we speak about the development money. We understand that the allocations that they do now, they do to support the economy, and an economy will be need to be supported still for a couple of years, even after the end of the war. But let's then answer ourselves, what do we have to do to get the access to the private markets? Because now if you look at any project in any industry, it might be even with very good returns, double digits, about 20, about 30, it's not bankable. Non-institution will open the limits because it will not pass the compliance. And just the risk policy of any bank, of any fund, even the most risky hedge funds, which tend to work with the high returns, they will not fund the project in Ukraine. So basically, the only thing which is available at the moment is the partners or quasi-partners money which are being generated at the markets through the guarantees or the complicated financial mechanisms. So this is what we have to be focused now at the moment and work on the instruments that do not impose the direct burden on the partners' budgets. What we are speaking about, for example, issuing the guarantees to do the insurance of part of the projects. This type of the schemes is now being developed and worked out by the Germans, by the Denmark, just to provide the government insurance coverage for the investments of those companies in Ukraine. Another, I think, perhaps the most powerful tool, which will be relevant for us for the next couple of years, is about the export credit agencies. Why that? Because if you take any project to be implemented in Ukraine, at least 30%, sometimes 50% is about the equipment. And specifically, the partners, the European Union, the United States, the Japan, are the main producers of this equipment that we would need. It doesn't matter what sector I was speaking about, agri-processing, about energy, about some infrastructure assets, this is about equipment. And in the whole world, equipment is not being sold just as an engineering product. It's being sold in the package of engineering plus funding product. But on the market basis, if you look at the Ukraine is in grade 7 for all the export credit agencies. It means basically that the cost of this funding will be above 15% with very tight constraints, basically not available for Ukraine. So that should be perhaps some political decision. And that might be the very strong stimulus to start up the Ukrainian economy, specifically for the investment part. Another block 3, I think, is about designing and implementing the concept which will provide the relatively high multiplier for every euro or dollar of the concessional money that our partners can provide for us. What is the problem at the moment? That the money that are being provided for the private sector by the governments, by the partners, they don't have any multiplier. Normally they are being channeled either through EBRD or through the World Bank, and if you look what they do just back-to-back funding with no leverage, with no multiplier. And this is the key thing that we need to change. And basically one of the ideas that we started to develop with BlackRock and JP Morgan is to install the Ukrainian Development Fund with the main KPI, to have as high multiplier as possible. We target obviously up to 10, but we think that the realistic is 3 to 4 at the beginning stage. And these are the first steps that we need to do, that we need to work at least to start up the investment process. And ultimately, obviously, we have to come up to the markets, to the free markets, because this is the enormous source of liquidity for the projects in Ukraine. And what are the key prerequisites to be there? First of all is the victory at the war and the security guarantees, and only the security guarantees that the business and the risk policies will trust. So we believe this is only NATO. The second, the long-term sustainable access to the markets, to the big markets, because Ukrainian market itself, it might be big as a recovery market for some specific type of the construction services, but it's not big as a consumer market, because we are only 40+ million. Normally you need hundreds of millions of people to pay back big investments. And the number 3 is the structural reforms that our partners expect from us. I think this is a separate big topic that might be discussed perhaps at a different panel. Thank you.
Thank you, indeed. We heard even yesterday, indeed, Larry Flint, the die-hard capitalist, to say that he wants the investment into this country to benefit the simple man. Everybody in Ukraine must benefit. And indeed, this is very hard to do, but also it's the same path which will bring you to the European Union, because that would mean establishing strong institutions and rule of law, which I'm quite sure that our European friends and partners would underwrite as well. But Danilo, Ukraine is a very special country because it has a fantastic civil society. And if it didn't have this fantastic civil society, this will just be a province of Russia. We know all that. So your civil society has carried you through revolution, been a kind of put a pressure on society to turn towards Europe. How can civil society assure that this rebuilding is going to be fair? I've heard the discussion about somebody in the village pushing some button because their apartment is ruined and getting the money. It's not that simple. But what can civil society do?
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. Hello, everybody. I think that the role of civil society is the main role in reconstruction, but to explain it more, to explain it better, I want to take us back to the very beginning of the war, the third decade of March. Nothing is clear. Total uncertainty. Russian troops are under Kyiv. And from this time, I remember this time, the first outlines of future reconstruction began to appear. President tasked economic bloc of government and parliament to start preparing of our recovery plan, and we first time presented the draft of this plan in Lugano in July. And this opened big discussion, international discussion regarding our recovery. And now we have already done many items from this draft of plan. We did it with civil society, with government, with business. This is common cause. And accumulating experience of this year, more than a year, I want to share some conclusions which regards next steps of Ukraine and our partners. First of all, I'm sure that we have to have one major recovery plan, periodically revived, periodically updated due to uncertainty of the war. Our Ukrainian government and our partners should monitor this plan. The second, we have to increase administrative capacity of all agencies involved in our reconstruction. These agencies should act in accordance with European principles of transparency and be audited by global auditors. The next, the role of Parliament will increase. There are more than 3,000 legislative acts which should be implemented in our legislation due to European integration and IMF memorandum. Also, Development Bank. I strictly support idea to transfer one of the state banks to the Development Bank as KfW in Germany. This bank should have one main task: to finance recovery and entities involved in recovery, special regulations and special license. Also, development projects. We have to move toward from the stage of fast recovery to fast recovery plus. Plus means that we have to involve in pipeline of recovery new big pilot projects with participation of state and international financial organizations and private sector also. And this is very important. Also, for Ukraine and our partners, I want that we should understand that recovery is a battle for peace. We, of course, will win this war. But a country which wins the war but failing recovery will have very big problems with stability inside, social stability and political stability. And Russia will use this sometimes. That's why we have to unite our efforts in this direction, and of course we will be successful.
So we heard the promise, reforms first, and that means that our money will fit well into the framework which will be prepared by the Ukrainian people themselves. But let's face it, there are always two elephants in the room when we discuss money in Ukraine. One elephant is where to get the money, and the other elephant indeed is how to control that this money is well spent. And I would now turn to Michal, to you, because you represent here the European Union, our union which also is going to be the partner and to a certain extent supporter of all G20 action and monies which will be hopefully spent in Ukraine. How do you see the structure of this spending of this recovery money? Because there is, of course, the national level, there is the local government level, and then there is the question of how much international donors initially will participate and will control how the money flows. Are there any kind of carrots which the European Union can offer? For example, if the European Union sees that some milestones in institution building have been met, that then more control of how the money is spent is going to independent Ukrainian institutions, or do you plan to keep a relatively tight hand? And how does the European Union see this the whole situation right now?
Well, first of all, it is, of course, a process that is Ukraine-driven. It is Ukraine's recovery, it's Ukraine reconstruction, but it's our common accession path. Yeah, we clearly see the time after the war, reconstruction and pre-accession, that is one process that cannot be artificially divided. And the financial needs that are there, I mean, it's huge. We cannot quantify it yet. We do not know how long the war goes on, but it's definitely clear it cannot only be public money, not only European or other donors' public money, and it can also not be raised through taxpayers in Ukraine, of course. So that we need to see to it within this reconstruction process that the overall framework for private investment to come is conducive to that, and that requires, of course, that the judicial reform is finalized. Yeah, that, so to say, the legal framework is in place, and that the courts are reformed, and that the other public institutions simply function according to the law. And in parallel, it was already referred to encourage private investment. There are, of course, certain guarantees necessary. And even now during the war, I know it from the German government, what they announced, that they say, okay, those who invest now already in Ukraine and the Russians destroy it, we will refund it. Yeah? So I think that is assuming also that the largest part will not be destroyed, of course. So that is an incentive that is very, very clear. Now, of course, we have the within the big framework of the next 4 years foresight, where we have this Ukraine facility in the making, where I'm the co-rapporteur in the Parliament. We will the key body is the Ukraine plan that is, as we speak, set up here by experts, as I'm told. So they are writing on it. It's good to hear that, and to prepare the major blocks of things that need to be in place when it comes into being. And this facility will get into force on the 1st of January next year. And so that sets from our side a framework. What has already been said by others, it definitely requires reconstruction and pre-accession, given the amount of legal work that needs to be done. It requires a parliament that is able to do it, that is really also institutionally strengthened. I say that also as a parliamentarian. It cannot all be only on the executive side and in agencies, but it requires public scrutiny through the elected parliament. And, well, by the way, it should be elected after the war, not during the war. That is, I think, a key thing. Otherwise, you get a very strange results, probably. But that's a separate discussion.
Yeah, we get strange results in parliament elections also in other countries.
What?
Anyway.
Yes, indeed. But
if I look back home,
under normal circumstances, elections should be held then.
Thank you, Michael. And I will now ask Davide. I asked him before Pierre because I'm Estonian and I have to be nice to him. You know why? Because Estonia wants to cooperate with Italy on recovery conference and providing support on digital and education. So, but I also have seen you go around this country and look at the devastation which has taken place and the need to recover the country. How should it be handled? That, I mean, of course, there will be institutions which will help local governments, which will be, I believe, very much responsible. But how do you feel we can reach quicker to the regions of Ukraine which have been deoccupied, with no local government sometimes left? How do you see this picture? How could we trust the local governments providing support for local government institution building and also be able to at the same time report back to our people that the money has been spent in a structured way and it is not a postcode lottery in Ukraine who gets things done first?
Okay, good morning to everybody. Thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to speak about reconstruction. which is a very important part of our 360-degree support for Ukraine. It's never too early to discuss reconstruction and the recovery, of course, in order to help Ukraine to increase its resilience, especially in face of a winter which is going to be difficult, even more difficult than last year. As the speaker said, we are working on the reconstruction plan with the Ukrainian government, and at the same time we are setting up this recovery facility at the European Union level. The idea is to prepare both plan and the recovery facility to be ready by the end of the year in order to start reconstruction in 2024. In the work that we are doing with the Ukrainian government, we had a summer full of workshops, meetings in the hybrid format almost every day. There is the idea of, on the one hand, identifying areas of investment and sectors, and on the other, to listen to the messages and the needs coming from the territory, from the regions, from the cities, from the oblast. This is a very important dimension to work with local authorities. There are a number of initiatives. One of these is chaired by the mayor of Florence. It's called Eurocities. We need, of course, to bring the real need of the people which comes from the territory to the reconstruction of Ukraine. And in this regard, we are working with a number of other European countries on this dimension. We have companies which are engaged in the preparation of the master plan in Mykolaiv with the United Nations. The Germans are working in Kharkiv with the Norman Foster Foundation. In Italy, we were a few days ago in Odessa with the president of the Triennale of Milano, the president of the Maxi Museum in Rome, in order to launch this initiative of rebuilding the Cathedral of the Transfiguration, the 52 cultural sites which were bombed by the Russians. Italy gave an important contribution in registering these sites into the heritage of UNESCO and in the list of sites which are in danger, which trying to destroying them is a violation of a UN convention, by the way, but we want to do something more, that is having a patronage on the city of Odessa in order to build, rebuild, reconstruct, transform Odessa into a modern city. We are very much attached to this city. It was founded by an Italian. There is a strong Italian community. There is a lot of Italian history with Genoa and Venice. Sister relationship with these two cities. It's an important area for connectivity, for transport, also for investment of our companies in the agribusiness, which is one of the sectors on which we want to work with the Ukrainian government. For sure, in the Ukrainian Recovery Conference that we are going to organize in 2025, and thank you very much for your offer of contributing to this, we will have a very strong local dimension, which is very much in line with the character of both countries, both Ukraine and Italy have a very multi-city, multi-regional dimension, which is very developed, and so it's very much in line with what we really feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Davide. And before Pierre makes his first remarks, I will tell my auditorium that you can wave frantically at me, and we will give you a chance to come into this discussion as well. Pierre, you're French. And of course, French people feel that their public sector really lacks money to guarantee their social security network right now. And European Commission has come out with the initial proposal, which says 50 billion. It's kind of magnitude less than might actually be needed, and out of that 33 is loans. That means that we need, of course, to turn also to member states and other donors to come in. How much is French civil society this time, French society, ready to contribute to recovery? And we heard already Davide to speak about regional initiatives. In Italy, other countries have these initiatives as well. I think it's a great idea to bring our citizens into this recovery. And because, of course, every French town is a ville jumelée with somebody, then I think you would be the specialist to talk about that. But I would also like you to touch upon this 50 billion, 600 billion kind of décollage, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and great to be here. Davide mentioned the fact that in Italy there are a lot of towns. Obviously, we are probably the specialists in terms of numbers of communes in France, with 36,000 of them. The political question you raised, which is the one of public opinion and public support, is really crucial to be on the side of Ukrainians on a sustainable way, over time, in a multi-annual commitment of all our countries. And we are very much working on a multi-annual commitment of France to Ukraine support in all its dimensions, defense, but also civil support through all the channels, the multilateral and international level, the European level, and the bilateral level of cooperation. And that's very important also to give visibility also to Ukraine and to Ukrainian people, but also to send very strong signals to the private sector and to the international community. I think you mentioned the 50 billion plan. Obviously, we may have discussions about the size, the distribution of the plan in terms of loans and grants, but it's a very large amount, which shows also the commitment of the European Union on the side of Ukraine. Part of it is about leverage, leverage through guarantees to multilateral institutions. By the way, they have leverage. EBRD, for example, use its balance sheet plus grant money or donor money to deliver investments. I think we have to have this discussion about leverage, but this is really fundamental if we want to show also to European citizens that their money is used in an effective way. Obviously, France is very much on the forefront, being the second contributor to the European budget, being a very large shareholder of all these institutions. We are very much preparing a package in terms of guarantees to the multilateral development banks. We will obviously support what Michael is also on the European Parliament side very much pushing, so that this plan can be also a source of hope, of reform, of support, and which is not only something which is owned by some, but which is a plan which is Ukraine plan for Ukrainians, owned by civil societies, all levels of governance in the country. That's why I spent a lot of time since I've been appointed in March, also in the region, Chernihiv region, which we are trying very much to support, not only through emergency support, but also through long-term plans, through private sector projects in the country. So that's very much about what we are trying to achieve. Collectively, I think coordination is fundamental among the G7 countries, but also among the European Union.
Danilo wanted a quick comment, and then I will really turn to the auditorium here. But just another number to cheer you all up. The financing need indeed may be 600, 700 billion, but we are 400 million European citizens. If you look at these numbers comparatively, it doesn't look bad, but please.
Yes, thank you very much. Regarding this topic, I want to add that I think that the most big threat for our recovery is war fatigue. War fatigue. We very appreciate the financial support which we receive from all over the world, from our partners, from United States, from EU. More than $100 billion military help, more than $60 billion direct budget support, also support for our refugees, also humanitarian aid. But this is natural, that long-term support leads to fatigue.
Yeah.
And it could be the very big mistake of free world to let this fatigue destroy our reconstruction plans.
Yes, I agree. And to avoid fatigue among our listeners, then now is the Q&A time. Please, Anders, you're the first. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Anders Åslund. Thank you very much. I think this is an excellent discussion. I would like to focus on one point, money. Don't believe that there will be a lot of private money coming in. It's excellent, as Mr. Shurma and Mr. Gahler told about private insurance for private companies, export credits, and political insurance, risk insurance are vital. But very little private money will come for the first 3 years. And I think that the Ukrainian government for last year to the Lugano conference, that was you, Julia, presented this with $300 billion for 3 years. I mean, this is the type of money that is needed, and I don't think that taxpayers in the West are likely to come through. Russia has to pay. And we can force Russia to pay. There is, as been discussed yesterday, more than $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that are frozen in the West. This money must be confiscated by the West and passed on to Ukraine's reconstruction. This must be the center. And then you have two kinds of arguments against it. One is that this is against international law. Well, you get international lawyers to argue for their case. It cannot be right that a country bombs a country, starts a war of aggression, and then is allowed to keep its money abroad. How could that be right? How can anybody with any morals or ethics argue that? It's impossible. So therefore, this money should be confiscated, and the lawyers are saying these are not sanctions, these are countermeasures. Russia has confiscated 4 big Western companies in Russia on the legal basis of countermeasures. How can it then be that we don't take this money? So the US is now working on such legislation, and the EU should follow. Canada has already adopted it. The UK has not done anything as far as I know. And then we have $300 billion, $200 billion of Russian sovereign assets are stuck in Belgium. This is the money that must pay it, and then we hope for the private money following that. There will be all kinds of private opportunities connected with it, but this must be the central source. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm sure it indeed merits a round of applause. And as just Jeffrey Rice in Davos said when we discussed the fairness of international law, that law and lawyers cannot stand in the way of justice being done. So thank you for that reminder. I see Rostyslav wants to comment on that.
Yes, I just want want to give a short remark on that. Obviously, Ukraine is super interested and pushing very hard to make this happen, because we are perhaps the most interested country in the world for this to happen. But what we see that really there are strong opposition and obstacles for that from all over the world, and we do understand their governments. But we need to resolve this equation somehow. So we don't need this money in 20 years, in 30 years, we need the liquidity now. That's why we try to design and invent the mechanisms which will preserve the sovereign immunity, which bothers the most of our international partners, and at the same time will provide the access to the liquidity at the moment. So we are now discussing two potential mechanisms. The first one is issuing the ESG bonds through the special purpose vehicle, which is already registered, the Register of Damages in Hague, under international agreement. And the frozen assets will be part of the collateral, with some kind of the leverage. So it means that we are not confiscating and not breaching the sovereign immunity. At the same time, we get the access to the liquidity at the very low price. Obviously, even this action will require some kind of adjustments of international law. But I think it's much easier and much quicker to access rather than to go to the full-scale confiscation. And at the same time, we will continue the process, our work on the confiscation. And at the moment, when we achieve this, I don't know, in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, we'll just do this back-to-back transaction to swap this. Another way is to use these frozen assets not as all collateral for the debt fund, to the debt instruments, but as the trust fund for the insurance of the private international investments. Again, under the same logic. So I think these are the two items that we will be focused short term to get the quick access to the liquidity, and we believe this is much easier to achieve than full-scale confiscation. Thank you.
Thank you. EU was challenged. Mike wants to rise to that challenge, please.
No, I'm very grateful for all creative ideas to get hold of as much as possible of that, but it definitely requires a proper legal base. But because the bigger catastrophe would be that we start seizing it or working on it in creative ways, and then some clever lawyers, mostly based in London, come up and go to court and get a verdict that gives a right to Russia. That would be the real political, not only legal catastrophe. So let's work on really doable frameworks and get as much as we can of the aggressors' funds.
Danilos, short comment, and then I want to see where our microphone ran.
My comment, yes?
Yours,
thank
yes,
you.
you know, but
thank you very much. Of course, I want to agree that the first big step to the confiscation of Russian assets is to transfer to Ukraine interest income on frozen assets of Russian central bank, and I know that this work will be successful. Also, regarding private capital, I agree with you. Of course, there is not. We don't receive now big investment, and this is understandable. But I think that we have to stimulate them through the instruments of insurance, first of all. And the second one, we have to create institutes of common investment from three parts: state, private capital, and international financial organizations. And if we can unite these three sources, I think we will be successful, and private capital will be stimulated to come to Ukraine.
We take our next question over there.
Morning, everyone. My name is Alexey Zhmirnetsky. I'm a Ukrainian MP. I want to clarify a very important, as I see, thing. This is a question for Mr. Shurma and for Honorable Vice Prime Minister. When you're saying about recovery plan, as I understand, you mean some delayed recovery plan. Recovery plan for peaceful times, recovery plan for the time when Ukraine is a member of NATO and so on. But as we heard yesterday, we can have some situation when this membership will be delayed for years, and the war may last for years. What we will do if it will be so? Because our enemy do not prepare the recovery plan for some after 5 years after the war. They are developing and adapting now. Maybe in the ministers, maybe in the office of the president. Do you have some plan B for recovery of Ukraine during the protracted conflict?
Yeah, I'm sure that this brings us into the budget support. Julia will answer, but I'm sure that also already now we see people from Europe building fearlessly in the regions which are still under the war and being bombed. So this is ongoing, but Julia, you will have the answer.
I will start and then I will forward to Rostyslav. So actually we are talking about recovery plan that not about that plan that can be implemented in 5 years. We're talking about the plan that we're implementing right now, starting from the next year. So if we talked about Ukraine facility plan that have already been mentioned previously, so this plan would start from the 1st January of 2024. So, and it will cover 4 next years. And you're absolutely right that we need to start the recovery immediately, and I would like to emphasize on one thing, that we, like a government, should focus on 2 things. First of all, it's on Ukrainian local businesses that are paying taxes, and that gives an opportunity to pay salaries to Ukrainian army and to buy ammunition. And it's extremely important right now to give them support, to encourage them to enlarge their businesses and to work. And in parallel, we should create this infrastructure of the insurance. And I'm very grateful, and we're discussing that you're a parliament. I expect that you would vote for the amendment to the legislation, to amendment of the mandate of Ukrainian Export Credit Agency that would allow it to cover, to provide insurance for the Ukrainian companies. Also, KUKE, Polish Export Credit Agency, yesterday announced that they would cover by the insurance both Poland and Ukrainian companies willing to participate in reconstruction. So, and also access to finance. I think it's the most urgent things, and all of the surveys show that Ukrainians business are suffering from the limit of access to finance because of very high interest rate, and I think it's something that we should be focused on.
Yes, maybe let me a little bit explain, because your interpretation was not exactly right. So the plan that we are now preparing is really a big vision about the big ticket, big projects, big strategical directions. But it has very specific granularity and steps by steps. We can take, for example, the big story like Green Steel. The total investment ticket in it is around $100 billion. And it assumes the build-up of 50 million ton of steel capacities, of 3 million ton of hydrogen capacities, etc. But we assume, and the project for that is for 20 years. But these are quite standard units that should be multiplied 20x. So you build one, and then you do 20 to 7 units. We plan to implement the first unit, the pilot unit, within next 4 years, starting from the next year. Blending the different type of finance, government, IFIs, proper corporations, etc. So obviously the magnificence and the scale of this plan can be revealed and unleashed only after we are part of NATO and EU. It is not possible to cover it with the war risk insurance, because this is all about the budget money again. But at least the first pilots will be implementing starting on from the next year in every segment. This is the first. The second one, that until we achieve the NATO, EU, etc., we need to be absolutely frank with each other. We will not have the really true big recovery. It will be very government-led. It will be more about the fast recovery that we are doing now, fixing the hospitals, schools, roads, energy infrastructure, etc., and stimulating the local business through the programs that mentioned Julia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add? Sorry.
Just a sentence. And
yes, one sentence. Alexei, if you open our draft of plan, which was presented in Lugano last year, you can see that we already done many items. and also in Verkhovna Rada, in the parliament. We adopted many laws which are in this plan. And what is the great plan of reconstruction? This is, of course, first of all, roadmap, but this is plan of new Ukraine. And we do this every day in Cabinet of Ministers, every day in the Parliament. We change, we make reforms which are very necessary for future of Ukraine.
Thank you. Also, Michael mentioned something, that German budget will maybe guarantee the investment into this country if it comes under the fire and is destroyed. And now Pierre and Davide can choose who wants less to answer that question. Should all European budgets with big firepower go ahead with this kind of national measures? Maybe Davide, you want to start? Now nobody wants to start, but Davide, you are waving to me, so you start.
Yes, as a small comment, first of all, from the side of the international community to the question that actually is being put to us by our private sector, Italian companies that we try to bring to galvanize for the reconstruction. Actually, reconstruction has already started. There are so many things that we are already doing. We are helping to increase the resilience of this country. We are rehabilitating areas which were under occupation. There is the demining issue on which we are already working. There is all the modernization of the economy in areas which were less affected by the war. The reconstruction is a huge challenge. It will last more than 10 years, will change the face of the continent, of the European Union. So the most important thing is getting ready with reforms. We spoke about the capacity of attracting foreign investment. We need a better business environment. We need also to work on increasing the efficiency, the capacity of the Ukrainian public administration in this recovery fund. There are funds related to improving the capacity, technical assistance, improving the capacity of the public administration. With regard to our European national budget, of course, there is a debate. There is a lot of attention from Italian parliaments, national parliaments, from public opinion. We are going to restart the application of Stability Pact next year, but there is a lot of a very high level of persuasion that we need to continue to contribute to Ukrainian resilience and reconstruction, because this is a challenge where we are all in. We need to help Ukraine as long as it takes.
Yeah, Davide mentioned stronger institutions, and I'm quite sure that the institution which Michal is representing is going to vote through the biggest ever pre-accession package, which will have a biggest ever IPA, or as it was formerly known, PARE. I like that name better. This gives you the light to build institutions, reform institutions, and I am sure this will be massive. But Pierre, to the question of national budgets, we speak firepower.
Yes, maybe, and building on what Davide just mentioned, and the response to the question which was raised about the timeline. We are talking about today, and that's why reconstruction or recovery is, behind these words, there is a little bit of misunderstanding what we are talking about. We are talking about first rebuilding or reconstruction in certain area as emergency reconstruction, which is being done today in all regions of Ukraine, which probably will increase even during the winter in the energy sector, which is publicly led, and that's completely true for the time being, and it will continue to be so. It would be also a fallacy to think that private sector will be able to cover the needs in the immediate term and probably in the next 2 or 3 years. On the private sector, and that's also something where we have to be a little bit balanced, it would be quite misleading to think that there is one silver bullet, that we will find one idea which will trigger more or less an inflow of money, both public and private, which will cover every need. Obviously, we are doing, all of us, I think, what we can. We've introduced, like Germany, for example, an insurance product which covers French companies which are investing in Ukraine, which is done by Banque Publique d'Investissement, and if there is a destruction of their assets, they will be covered by the French budget. So that's one element, but that cannot trigger by itself an investment in Ukraine. The first, and as you know, French companies are the first foreign employer in Ukraine, so obviously there are quite a lot of large companies in the country which kept their activity in the country. They are generally the best ambassadors to attract also new investment in the country. Should we do more, for example, on that investment or insurance capacity at the European level? I think yes. There are ideas, by the way, from EBRD, for example, on insurance of goods, which would be a pilot, and I think it's full of potential. But I would just say that it's a combination of things. It's not one thing, and having tried also in my former life to attract for 5 years foreign companies in Ukraine from EBRD, I would say that what Michael mentioned at the beginning, which is trust in the rule of law, in the judiciary, is probably the most important element in changing perceptions in our countries, so that there can be also this trigger, and there is the shock of trust, which is so important.
There was one other question. If you ask quickly, you might even get an answer, because almost...
So I will make a remark. GLOBSEC was the first organization that opened an office in Kyiv since the beginning of the full-scale war. And it comes all back to people. So Anders started with money, I will follow with people. Organizations like ours will start to open new offices in Kyiv more and more and more. But people who are working here in Kyiv, my insurance from the Europe is not valid in here. So maybe, you know, working on the ways how at least some part of the country might apply insurance for people from abroad might attract more people to come here. Also, trans-border transfer of money, so hybrid teams can work in Ukraine, in Europe, in the United States, and it will be easier to pay for experts, would help organizations like GLOBSEC and others. So what I'm trying to say is you should be attractive to people who want to come and work here. With schools, with institutions, transfer of money, anything, so it will be attractive for people to come, invest and live in, because it's a beautiful country. Anyone who comes falls in love, but it should be easier.
Thank you for this example of how many small housekeeping items we need to take care in order to get this thing up and running. And we're almost out of time. I would really like to thank my big panel of financial nerds and also a public who was able to stay awake. Thank you. You did a great job of being entertaining on this very difficult matter. And as I learned from my Ukrainian friends about 2 years ago, the only way to deal with the elephants, if you really need to eat it, you do it one bite at a time. And also I think this is the best way to end our panel here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your remarks.